Thanks for tuning into the All Funds Network podcast. Skyler, this is a fun one we just wrapped up with Nathan. We talk a lot about
Yeah,
the manufactured housing in particular, which is great.
yeah, manufactured housing, RVs, and mobile home parks. It's pretty fascinating to kind of hear his journey on where he started. Actually getting land acquisition, which was really gives him some background, which I thought was pretty interesting. And just talking about where things are today, opportunities, trends, both from a macro and micro perspective. Obviously, talk about tax efficiencies and those aspects as well at a high level. Definitely something to pay attention to for
Yeah,
sure.
100%. Yeah, we talked about some of his deals that he's made, some of the things he sees in the market, and even just simple things like culture as a
Yeah,
company. So
yeah,
this is
yeah,
cool. We covered a lot here. Yeah, we
yeah. We really did.
a lot of good chatter. So this is cool. Anyone that's investing in real estate, interested in investing in real estate, this is a fun one. It's unique. We just covered storage units a couple calls ago.
We did.
So this is fun. We definitely dive a lot more into the manufactured side of things here.
Right. I appreciate his thoughts on being a fund manager and his thoughts from an investor standpoint. Obviously, he goes into the deals himself with his own money, which I think is definitely interesting as well,
Yeah,
for sure.
he'll aligns the interest. That's for sure. So
Yeah.
cool. Without further ado, let's jump in
Awesome.
the episode. Thanks for tuning into the All Funds Network podcast. My name is Mike Schroeder. Today I'm here with my partner Skyler Steinke, and we are joined by Nathan Jameson. Nathan is the founder and managing partner of Arx Capital. They are a real estate investment firm managing over $150 million in assets across manufactured housing, RV parks, and other alternative real estate sectors. Nathan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we start with your background. Why don't you tell us about, how'd you get into the real estate game here?
I think I was drawn to real estate from a very early age. I moved around a fair bit when I was young, and I happened to be in Oklahoma in the mid 80s when you had the S&L crisis and then the oil bust. And I remember, kind of living in a subdivision and homes going up all over the place, and then it just stopped. And I was young. I was 8, 9 years old, and but I just remember all of a sudden you could go into these homes like anytime. And there's something about like being a young boy and the adventure of going into these empty homes that are like half built and finding the plumbing slugs that were like quarter sized and trying to see if they'd work in, vending machines. And um, and I really just got drawn to it. I think because of the built environment and the nature that like I can drive by it as an investor now. I can see it. I know what's happening there. If something's not going well, it's kind of readily apparent. And so when I had an opportunity, kind of post college, to get into real estate, I was really drawn to it and jumped in with both feet.
That's awesome. Yeah. What was the first deal that you did?
Yeah, so I coached basketball in college, post college, for 2 years, and I did my MBA at the same time. And I got an MBA in finance and entrepreneurship. And my wife told me that I had to stop going to school. I needed to get a real job. So I like it. Actually gotten accepted to law school, and I was like, oh, I got an MBA. I'll go get a JD too. But she said, no, 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 you gotta get a job. And so I pivoted to real estate and I landed with a small regional home builder in Pennsylvania who was focused exclusively on 55 and over housing. And this is like 2004. And they hired me in land acquisition. And, I tell people land acquisition was such a natural transition for me from college basketball coaching and particularly recruitment because I was now recruiting landowners and recruiting property. Only I didn't have the NCAA telling me what I couldn't do, right? So like way before the current regime and the NCAA, you couldn't, give kids $5 for laundry and you could only call them once a week, stuff like that. Well, so that was the era I came from. And then all of a sudden I was recruiting farmers to buy their land. And, I could show up every day with a pie or, a scotch and say, hey, like we'd really like to buy your property. Um, and, evaluating the zoning of the property, the geology, the topography, determining, where it fit in our portfolio for subdivision was a lot like evaluating athletes. I mean, different category for sure, but I was used to kind of grading and recruiting. And I think from land acquisition, I would tell anybody kind of looking to get into the business, it's a great place to learn the entire business. You've got to underwrite the everything. You've got to figure out if it doesn't work, can you structure something with the seller that does work? What's your eye toward financing? What's the capital stack going to look like when you get this thing approved? I did a lot of public meetings with the municipalities, getting approvals. And so over the course of, I guess, almost 14 years, 13 years, we built the company, significantly larger. It became the 75th largest home builder in the country by sales in 2015. So that was about 420 closings, about 150 million in sales, and I'd become one of the three owners of that company. And they continue to be successful. But in 2016, I separated from my partners and I started Arx Capital, and I started looking more at existing assets versus development. I still
Hmm.
do some development now, but the significant overhead we had managing full entitlements, all land development, all home construction, all sales, it was significant. And I was just me in 2016.
Hmm.
Um, so the first deal I did was a mobile home park. And I remember vividly getting the K1 at the end of the year after getting really nice cash flow, and I had these significant K1 losses. And I called my accountant. I said, I think you made a mistake. And he's like, well, why do you think that? I said, well, I bought this mobile home park, and it's I don't think you could depreciate land. And he said, well, it's not land, it's land improvements. Of course, there's some land, you can't depreciate that, but it's mostly land improvements. And the light bulb went off, and I kind of figured out that I couldn't afford to not buy mobile home parks.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
that was 2016 was my first mobile home park deal.
Yeah, and actually, all right,
Wow.
before we get into the mobile stuff, you mentioned you're buying like land from farmers. What was that like? Were you guys just are these like farms kind of? I think about where I came, like where I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in a town called Batavia. It's like the farthest west
Sure.
before the cornfields, but that's, we moved there like late 90s, right as they started converting all these old farms into neighborhoods. Is this kind of what you guys were doing?
It's just like that. I mean, and back then, uh, I would go into a market where we thought we wanted to be. This was largely in Pennsylvania, and I would pull into a local gas station. And in the gas station, I would go in and I would look for um, a map that they were selling of the area because like Google Earth wasn't. I mean, I think MapQuest was a thing, but there
Hmm.
was no like Google Earth, and municipalities didn't have their zoning online 25 years ago, and so I'd literally, pull up the map and I would just start to drive around and kind of see where I was going on the map and go like, okay, that's this property here and this farm here. And, location, 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 trying to find like, where's the grocer? Where's the, shopping? Where are the schools? And then zeroing into properties that would support what we were doing, which was generally, we were looking kind of 40 to 50 buildable acres that would yield, call it 185 to 300 single family homes that, with a clubhouse and walking trails, kind of like a village's light.
Hmm.
Pennsylvania is, I think, the second oldest, demographically, the second oldest state in the country behind Florida. And, it's great to retire in. So we attract a lot of retirees from the high cost northeastern states, New Jersey and New York especially, but even Ohio and Maryland, where they can come to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has no state income tax on retirement income.
Hmm.
So your teacher, your public servant, from those states can move here, and I mean, what are New York income tax? 9%. I mean, it's
Yep.
high, so there's significant savings to move to Pennsylvania, and so we were attracting all these folks to our communities.
Yeah, very cool. And then, yeah, tell us about that transition. So, what made you want to get into mobile homes?
I've begun to research it. My recollection is, being in land acquisition, I would drive property, and there was a particular property that had a mobile home park on it. And I made a comment like, boy, that site would be great for what we do. It was a pretty large mobile home park in Western Pennsylvania. And my partner said to me, he said, I'd like to own a mobile home park someday. I hear they're a nice annuity. And
Mhm.
so I kind of tucked that away. And on the side, I started to do some research. And, you know, back then, I think we were talking about buying, 10 caps and grooming them to 20 caps. It was kind of like the playbook.
Hmm.
Um, Now that playbook doesn't exist today, but I liked, I would say that there's kind of this school of thought around mobile home parks and similar asset classes that it's kind of management light. And that was not the culture that I grew up in. And it's not the way I learned to do real estate. Nothing manages itself. And so, as I got into the business, I just learned from the ground up. I wanted to understand everything. I wanted to understand how the home was set, where the utilities came from. Um, we got a dealer's license so we could bring homes in at wholesale prices. I learned the best time to fix a water leak is like at 3 a.m. because nobody's using their water. And so you can vector into where that leak is more quickly, and be less exploratory in your repairs. Um, and so we just believe that boots on the ground operations is what carries you through. And that came, frankly, from my home building experience. In '08, when the Great Recession happened, we navigated that by being on the ground every day, meeting with people who were buying homes from us, supervising our vendors, making sure our vendors could stay in business, right? Like
Hmm.
we still had capital to pay them, but if somebody else was shorting them, how could we make sure that they stayed in business and could serve our communities? And I think in real estate, and I'll say like the less sophisticated real estate, like home building is not super sophisticated, manufactured housing, not super sophisticated, self-storage and so on. Some of the multifamily, some of the office, the mixed use tends to be a little more sophisticated. Um, what I think about is uh, that mindset of a lot of builders in the Great Recession was, well, I'm just going to hunker down and wait it out. And that was not our mindset. We were entrepreneurs and had financial backgrounds, and we sat down weekly and said, what are new creative ways we can figure out to how to sell homes in an environment when no one's buying homes?
Hmm.
What are ways that we can make financing easier? Are homes more attractive? Is there a new amenity we need to add? Because our buyer doesn't have to move. How can we make moving more attractive than staying where they are? And so that's relevant just because, I brought that mindset to our manufactured housing and investment business where, because we've always done it that way is not something I ever want to hear in our organization. Like when we ask, why do we do it? Or why that? We challenge assumptions constantly. We don't think that because somebody's always done it that way or the industry's always done it that way is an acceptable answer. And we think, fighting for those extra, marginal returns really pays dividends both in cash returns for our investors and reduced risk, which is, that's almost as important as return.
Hmm.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess from your background and kind of where you're at today, obviously you started this company, things are going well. So manufactured housing, what does that look like today for you? Where are most real estate investors missing that you kind of have unique kind of lens on current state where things are at?
Yeah, I don't think there's a ton of opportunity to get in. And part of that is, the large capital providers and allocators are very intentionally kind of consuming the properties and the investment dollars to buy those properties. And so I think, there's a handful of groups out there who are doing what we're doing, who are choosing intentionally not to take, Wall Street type money,
Mhm.
um, and that's challenging. We've talked to all those guys, and we've just made the decision that The control that they demand and the cost of funds is not something we're willing to accept. We don't think it's fully aligned with business strategy of creating sustainably affordable housing over the long term and generating returns for our investors and our team. So I'm pretty passionate about ensuring that our model makes room for kind of the millionaire next door accredited investor who wants to get in. Um, and I think the other side of the coin here is there are a number of people who are in this kind of space, and I think we've seen this over the last 5 or 6 years. We found that some people were swimming naked, right? Like they bought a deal, and they thought they were smart, but cap rates had compressed and rents had gone up, and they decided that the best way to make money was to teach other people how to do it, since they did one of them. And frankly, they attracted a fair bit of capital on Instagram and Facebook. And I saw that, and I'll confess, there was a piece of me that went like, boy, should we be doing that? um, and I don't really like the limelight, frankly, so I just didn't chase it. Um, and then, when we kept passing on deals that those folks were buying, and then we saw the debt market shift, um, we really were thankful that we had stuck to our knitting in terms of the asset quality, the management approach, and not chasing shiny objects in terms of creating, sexy Instagram ads and drawing in investors. But that very thing then is what makes me want to be available for people who are looking for quality returns in uncorrelated assets. The market's at all-time highs. It feels like every day. Um, where can we find assets that are uncorrelated to what's happening in those equity indices and in the overall economy?
There's one thing you said in there, Nate, that I wanted to double click on. You talked about the investors. You talked about staying away from more corporate capital, if you will. Talk to us about that side of the things, and like who are the type of investors that you guys really want to find and partner with.
Yeah, so it probably is worth going back to like how we created the current investor platform that we have. So I bought that first park in 2016. I started to buy more parks. Then coming into 2020, the CARES Act passed. We saw with CARES Act passed in COVID, and we had experienced outstanding collections in our business. We felt bullish, both because of our existing business and the CARES Act, that it was a great time to continue to buy. So by the end of 2020, I'd purchased 20, or sorry, excuse me, a dozen mobile home parks in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Maryland at that time.
These are
And
through
so
the fund or just personal investments.
just me,
Hmm.
just me. Yep. So I brought on a young guy who's now my partner, Levi Jekyll. He was a CPA, and he quit his job as an auditor at PwC to go buy mobile home parks. And
Oh
his
wow.
wife was pregnant. So you're like, as like my wife said, he's either brilliant or crazy. She said, I got to meet his wife, and then I'll know which it is. So thankfully, his wife is an amazing human. And my wife said, there's no way she'd be with him if he was crazy. So he must be brilliant. So Levi and I were working together, buying these properties, and we said, um, we've got more in the pipeline than I personally wanted to close that year, but they were good deals. We said, what if we invited people to invest? And we went a step further. So what if we contributed the 12 properties that I'd purchased to the fund and invited people to buy into that cash flow? And then with their investment, we'll continue to buy some more properties. And so in March of 2021, we did open that first fund, Arx Fund One. And I guess we had a dozen mobile home parks, and I think we probably bought six more in the first fund with that additional capital. And about 36 months later, so that was about $21 million of equity. About 36 months later, through some selective sales and a large CMBS refinancing, we'd returned 120% of the capital. And our investors continue to own, I think, nine mobile home parks in that fund. So the big differentiator here still, though, is like I own 70% of that fund. based on the contributions. And I didn't really mark the assets up. It was like most of it I'd bought pretty recently. They kind of went in at cost. Um, but why I bring that up is just like alignment. So in our second fund, same thing. I made a big upfront investment in that fund, and I think that's given. I think I've just observed that has drawn the kinds of investors who understand what that means to be investing alongside someone who's made this one of their primary investments, and that uh, again, because so many syndicators have their investment has been, well, maybe they put their acquisition fee in, or they say, well, their time, or they're working to earn a promote kind of carried interest, but they really don't have their own money at risk in
Yeah.
the way that we've chosen to do that. And I just, like, frankly, I wouldn't do it any other way. I won't always invest 70% of the fund, but I'm frequently investing 25 to 40% of the fund. And I want to have complete alignment with our other LPs.
Yeah, that's definitely unique. It's you're eating your own cooking, right? A lot of investors don't see the GP take risk from a monetary point of view. I think
That's
that's
right.
definitely there's some alignment there for sure.
Yeah, and the downside, I mean, if there's a downside, I'd say, well, maybe it's limited our growth a little bit, but it's kept us hyper focused on only doing the right deals. I think, the attractiveness to some of the big capital partners is, oh, that, they're going to write a big check and you go buy. But I had experience back in my home building days where we'd raised a fund from a large public company, had given us 200 million bucks to go invest. And every month, and this is '06, '07, so like right before the Great Recession, and every month they called and they said, when are you putting that money out? We got to start accruing returns on our books. And we couldn't find a good deal, but it just stuck with me that, like, oh, well, when somebody raises money, they're going to put it out. Like, whether it's a good deal or not, they're going to put it out. And we just resisted that. Um, and, I'm more focused on profitability than I am on, saying how much AUM we have.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned good deals relative, mobile home parks. I know there's a limit on certain states. Can you talk about like what the mobile home park market looks like? From that lens. I know because certain states we don't build it anymore, right? In certain states in the
Sure.
country, and I know there's some limit. It's hard to find certain opportunities. To your point, good deals.
Yeah, we have, I built my real estate career in the Northeast, Pennsylvania especially, and I still do some development and entitlement work, kind of separate and apart from this. And so, to your point, it just takes longer and longer to get the right to build anything. Um, and for that matter, it's almost never that we give the right to build a new mobile home park. Um, and that's for two reasons. One is that generally municipalities have made them illegal, either in actuality or in like de facto, because they've zoned property that's mobile home park where it's a local city park. Like, you can never build that. They don't want it there. And so um, the other reason it's not getting built is because the cost of infrastructure is roughly the same to build at a very affordable, low cost housing product as much a $500,000, $600,000 single family home product. Those costs are roads, stormwater, utility connections. They're not materially different to build a mobile home park versus single family development, except a national builder is going to pay me $200,000 for a finished lot, or I can sell a mobile home for $150,000 and still have all my improvement costs. So, from a fiduciary perspective, you can't justify building a mobile home park. To do that, you've got to go like to the outer reaches of suburbia, and you might have to have private utilities, and even then it becomes difficult to do that. So what we're seeing and I would say the Northeast, the Midwest, and to some degree the Mid-Atlantic, um, there is a declining number of mobile home parks, um, which is crazy. Just like, if we pause on that for a moment, in what market, in what economy does a product for which there's increasing demand, we reduce the supply, right? So we are taking mobile home parks offline and turning them into strip malls and townhomes and data centers. And uh, this is right as we need more affordable housing more than ever. So that increases the value, frankly, of the ones that exist. And, it pushes rents up faster than anybody would really like to see, I think, for these investments. Um, that said, focusing on markets where entitlements are hard and there's a declining number of options for affordable housing has been a very good investment.
Makes sense. Do you guys do any new build for mobile parks, or are these all or for manufactured home, or are these all existing deals?
So far have been all existing, and where we have been able to make the numbers work on kind of new is on an expansion, right? When you've got some residual land in an existing park, then the economics are a little different because I probably can't, subdivide and sell that land to DR Horton where their residents or their buyer has to drive through our mobile home park to get to that. So the economics start to shift a little bit, and the highest and best use for the residual excess land becomes expansion. Um, Even then, it becomes hard to get it entitled, but we have had some success getting municipalities to kind of acknowledge, well, we have a massive deficit of housing in the municipality, in the county, in the region. This makes a lot of sense. And then you just end up fighting about how much it's going to cost to put the infrastructure in. Like classic case, the original mobile home park was built with, 20-foot cartway. Well, now the fire code says you got to have a 25 or 26-foot cartway, and even more where you have a hydrant. And so they want to say, well, your current roads don't meet our new spec, so I don't know if we're going to give you an expansion. And then of course they, kind of put their hand out and say, but if you could pay for this other thing, if you could build a, we need a new fire engine. Should you pay for that? And maybe we'll give you what you want. I mean, that is happening so much.
How does that aspect look? Do you, when you look to build a new uh you know or let's just say expand a current park, do you need to pay for those roads? Like, does the city pay for them, or do they, kind of find a way to justify that it's getting paid for?
Yeah, in almost every case, I mean, we're installing those improvements, and paying for them. They've got to come from us. And in fact, usually what's happening is not only do we have to pay for those improvements, but they're going to make us do a traffic study and see if we have to put a turn lane in to the community because we're adding 36 homes, and what is that going to do to peak traffic, in the morning, the evening, and so forth. Do they want to push us to add some stormwater to rectify, the fact that stormwater regulations didn't really exist when the original part of the property was built 60 years ago. Um, so the cost of building that is going to be more than actually just like installing the what you need to build the homes.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, Nathan, how's your kind of your initial background played into kind of your research? Obviously, land acquisition. It's a bit of a, I'm sure that it's very helpful in kind of finding these opportunities based on what
It,
you're talking about here.
it really has been, and it's not something that I didn't predict it. But I can't unsee, what my first 15 years of experience was. Um, and I think as I go to industry conferences and I meet people in our industry, very few people. I don't know if I've met anyone who's kind of in the mobile home park business who came from a home building and land development background. Um, Maybe you see some multifamily guys, you see some guys who left self storage, and um, I kind of just start with when in real estate with what is this piece of land and what should it be? And like a case in point, we were buying a mobile home park in our first fund in Delaware, and it was usually when we buy a mobile home park, the way it was approved was you have like one tax parcel, and you might have 100 homes on it or 200 homes on it, but it's one tax parcel. In Delaware, this property was 72 lots, or 72 homes, but it was actually 72 lots, legal lots. And so I put my home building hat on. I said, "Oh my gosh, like I think if we just got rid of these homes, I could sell these lots like as is to a national builder for meaningfully more than we were paying." So we began to explore that, and I was right. But then when we ran our numbers, we actually figured out we could make it more valuable than what the builder was going to pay us if we just kind of executed our improvement plan over the course of say 5 years. But we wouldn't have had sold the asset. We'd have an asset that would continue to generate income for our investors and, provide affordable housing. If we'd have removed this, we're getting rid of $100,000 homes with, $600 lot rent, and that it's in the Delaware Beach area, and they were going to build $600,000 homes. So we would have been part of the problem of reduced affordable housing. Um, yeah, I would say it's really helped. Let me give you one more example. We bought a portfolio of mobile home parks from somebody in 2021 or 22. And these were smaller properties in Pennsylvania, and two of them are really bad. Like we would have never considered them, but for the fact that they kind of came with a pretty nice asset. And so we ran the numbers and we figured out we could, based on what we were paying, we could pay for all of it just based on the one property. We could borrow, I forget who we borrowed from, I think a local bank, and that would give us enough leverage with some equity to buy all three properties. So additionally to that, the nice property had a home that was on a separate tax parcel. And so it all came with the deal. I'm going to give you rough numbers, like $1.3 million. I think we paid for these three properties. Maybe it was 100 total sites plus a home. We sold the two dog properties. I say dog, that feels, yeah, they were just like
Not good
not in good
properties.
condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in good condition. And the lift to get them to where we would be proud of them was too much. So I think we sold them in total for $850, and we sold the single family home for $225. And we still had this property that we paid, $1.3 million for all of it. To me, I'm like, well, why didn't the people that sold it to us see that? But they may not have just known. They were kind of like multifamily guys, and just show me how to collect lot rent. And we tend to think about it more from a development perspective.
How do you guys go about finding new deals today?
We have a mix of sources. I would say we really like brokers. And like a lot of businesses, there are those that, their numbers are just never right. And you learn pretty quickly to not deal with them. But, we think that they do, good brokers do a really good job setting sellers' expectation and getting to a transaction with a company that's a closer like us. We also like the deal direct. And so we don't just kind of see the deal flow that's inbound. We're constantly outbound. We send direct mailers. We do some phone calls. We ask for referrals. The mobile home park network, when we do a good job for a seller, we help them achieve their retirement goals. We say, do you know anybody else who owns a mobile home park who might want to sell? Sometimes it's a relative, sometimes it's a friend. And, when we do what we do, they're glad to refer us to others.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm going to ask you a non-tax advice question, just to be clear. Relative to what you mentioned earlier, you talked about tax efficiencies, and you had that light bulb moment early in your career, like you could not buy these properties. What is
Yeah.
your thoughts on tax efficiencies relative to what you're doing now? What goes into that thought process, if any, as you think about certain opportunities there?
So I think manufactured housing and RV parks are among the most tax efficient real estate investments that can be made. And that's because, our tax policy has decided that, the depreciation, the useful life of land improvements is 15 years. And, is it actually 15 years on kind of all of them? I think the reality is it varies. Am I going to have to repave a road in 15 years? Probably. Am I going to have to redo all the sewer lines and water lines? Probably not. So there's tax efficiency that, because of the leverage that you can apply in a real estate purchase, allows our investors to take a year one tax deduction of $1.50 to $2 for every dollar they invest. And so I don't see other investments that really give them, I would say, investments of this risk profile, which is fairly low when you buy it right and operate it well, that offer that kind of savings. Um, so the other comment I'd make is on the taxes is no one should ever let the tax benefits be the tail that wags the dog. And I'll say that from experience. I did one deal in New Jersey that I wish I had to do over, and it was back before we had the fund. I was buying it myself, and I was looking for some losses, and I think we ended up selling it for what we bought it for. A few years later, and I got the losses, but it didn't feel great. It was just one of those moments you're like, yeah, if I'm honest with myself, I bought that for the losses, and that wasn't the right thing.
Yeah, just an added benefit, not the main focus, right?
That's right.
From a tax
Yeah,
perspective.
Is it
100%.
15 years depreciation for manufactured house versus it's like 20 and a half, right, for regular residential properties?
Yes. So 27 and a half year is
Mhm.
multifamily,
Hmm.
and or a single family home that you're renting. Um, the land improvements, regardless of what's on those land improvements, is 15-year property. And so that the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act said that any sub 20-year property could be bonus depreciated. And then it was like 100% for a few years, and then it started to scale back, and it was going to zero, except the one big beautiful bill reinstated it to 100%, like in perpetuity. So, the 27 and a half year just continues to be, you're taking your depreciation over that amortization, but the accelerated nature is you can move that up. So on a mobile home, which is what you asked about, we don't generally own the mobile homes, although in a portfolio of say 2,000 homes, we might own 15% of them, as we're in the process of bringing them in, selling them, or renting them until we can sell them. Um, but if we own a mobile home, that's 5-year property. It's actually classified as personal property. Um, that said, I wouldn't, if I could sell every home that we brought in immediately, I would choose that over the depreciation that you get from the 5-year property. I think the alignment of, the landlord and the resident when they own their home is better, in terms of the long-term uh, returns on the property, and the pride of ownership and the care that the resident has for the community when they own their home.
Yeah. Where do you see the kind of trends and opportunities today in 2026 and beyond? Obviously, there's a lot of things that factor into that. Like you mentioned, taxes, big, beautiful bill. Maybe Trump will pass another aspect of affordable housing, those types of situations. But where are you kind of looking? Where are you hunting? I know there's a lot of criteria that you have looking for quality
Yes.
opportunities.
Yeah, we continue to operate in the Northeast, and we are actively pursuing opportunities going west into the Midwest. I think that without naming states, I'll just say the Midwest. Frankly, redder states where property rights exist in a greater way. New Jersey last year passed statewide rent control for manufactured housing. There's been some conversations that Pennsylvania would entertain that, and I think some of that is kind of the populist era that we live in. Unfortunately, we seem to have a number of politicians that don't understand the negative impact of rent control on product quality, product supply, and really kind of how it affects capital flows. And as you go west, as you go south, frankly, you just see a better environment for that. Um, so I think in addition to the mobile home parks, we've added RV parks. So when I think about RV, I think about two classes. I break it into two classes. I think about RV as hotel and RV as housing. And I'm not interested in RV as hotel. RV as hotel to me is like you're in your one wheel or your RV driving I-80, and you yawn and you need a place to pull over for the night, and then you're gonna get back on the road. We call it transient. Um, we're more interested in RV as housing, where I mean, frankly, it's a second home for a lot of people in a certain socioeconomic class where they're going to go there in the summers, from Labor Day to Memorial Day to Labor Day, and they're going to be at the lake or the pool. Maybe it's, there's some, kind of natural amenities, a state park or something like that. And they're going to invite their friends and maybe their family members join them, and they're going to build an addition on their RV. That's much stickier in terms of residency. So we'd call that seasonal or long-term RV. And so, again, going back to my development background is, I think what is an RV park actually? And so it's roads, utilities, maybe some amenities. It's a place to have a residence. And because in this country we have such a challenge producing new residences, we think that's good for the moment and it's good for the long term, because that's going to be a place where somebody can pop in there and have a residence, particularly as we have a number of, the demographic aging that's occurring, where a lot of people will choose to sell their home and they'll drive around. They'll park it where they might have a place in Florida in the winter and a place in Pennsylvania in the summer.
That sounds like Mike
A
traveling.
little
Oh
bit.
yeah. All
A
right.
little bit.
A little
Are
bit.
you an RVer, Mike?
No,
Thought
it's
about it,
it's
right?
on the bucket list. We have talked. We have floated the idea of getting an RV. We've been this is the first year we really got out and snowbirded though. We went to Phoenix and
Yeah.
Yeah,
uh, Sedona. So we were just trying to get away from the cold weather up here up north.
sure.
But RV is on the bucket list. It is something that I would like to get.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty wild what people are spending on some of these. And we're not really focused
Yeah.
on places you can put $1 million RV, but there are $1 million
Right.
RVs driving up and down the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I'm just curious, Nathan, when you look at these RV parks, what improvements or things have you added to it to make it more, attractive? We talked about a little bit about that, but what are you seeing as an opportunity? Maybe certain trends. Somebody wants an
Yeah,
additional,
I think it's
whatever it is.
similar to manufactured housing. I would say we're not great buyers from, I'll say, institutional type owners who have already kind of made the investments that need to be made. We're
Okay.
really good buyers for, they're often called like a mom and pop owner, but a long-term owner who frankly is undermanaged. Maybe undermanaged is the wrong word. They've underinvested. Often they've heavily managed the property, but they've underinvested in the property. And so, the roads are tired. Maybe there's some infrastructure that needs some attention. There's an opportunity to expand, and they just, I think, frankly, because they've put themselves in a situation where they rely on the cash flow from the property for their living, that they don't have the cash flow or maybe the sophistication or desire to take on debt to make the improvements that really could elevate the property to a new level, or get it where kind of it was 20 years before. And so we can come in, we can buy it on the existing cash flow, take rents to where they now deserve to be, make the improvements that need to be made. And it's really a very similar formula to our manufactured housing.
The have you guys seen any like changes in like the building structures, like in terms of these manufactured houses? Like, I mean, I see some stuff on YouTube. It's like 3D printing and stuff like that, or like, tiny homes have become pretty popular recently.
Sure. Yeah.
Kind of how have the structures changed?
So it's definitely evolving. I mean, go back to this early 70s. Mobile homes is what they were called before HUD was created. When HUD was created, they
Sorry, what
became
does
manufactured.
HUD stand for?
So HUD is Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is the regulator for manufactured homes. So what it means is they're the regulator is a municipality will give me a zoning permit, maybe even a building permit for that home that I bring in, but they don't have any say over how that home is built. They have say over how I connect the utilities, how I affix the home to the ground, but they don't come in and inspect, my light switches or my framing or my drywall. That's all done by HUD and it's from the manufacturer. So, what's happened is the quality and the energy efficiency of those homes has increased dramatically. And that's come through regulation. It's come through an emphasis on these things to the point where if you bought a home in the late 70s or early 80s, that home was probably, we call it a metal. It's a metal box with a metal roof. The architectural lines feel kind of square, and we're moving those out of our properties as we have opportunity. and bringing in newer homes that are, they're frankly the insulation values, the quality of the construction is just every bit as good as you'd see, in a site-built home. The challenge is, and this is a challenge that we hope there's some legislation that fixes this, is because it's not on a permanent foundation, our buyer, who most needs it, isn't eligible for conventional financing. Like we all benefit from the fact that if you buy a single family home that's affixed to the ground, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are probably making your financing cheaper than it would otherwise be because they're buying these banks' mortgages. Well, because a mobile home, manufactured home is not affixed to the ground, it falls under what's called a chattel loan. It's 5-year property, it's personal property. And that means that our 700, 750 credit score is going to have a 9%, 10% mortgage rate. Frankly, you can't even call it a mortgage because it's not real estate. It's a loan. And that came from kind of an old school of thinking that, oh, well, if I'm a lender, what's my security if this home just drives away?
Mm.
99% of homes that are installed today never leave the site they're placed on. They're too valuable, frankly, and it's too expensive to move. So we actually saw, I think because of this, manufactured homes in quality communities actually increased at a higher percentage rate than traditional single family homes over the last 5 years.
Um,
Now it's on a lower initial value than, a typical single family home, but as a percentage, it's increased significantly. But the big predictor of that is community quality. And so when we come into a community and, we raise rents and we make improvements, we're really clear with people that uh, in most cases, 100%, 95% of the community owns their home. We want to help defend the equity they have in their home. And the greatest defense for that is the quality of the community.
yeah, that's really interesting. I guess on the financing side, can you talk a little bit more about what you see with, because that's an interesting situation, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of folks.
Yeah. I mean, we see it a lot because, the biggest challenge for our customer who's buying a home is the down payment. And the second biggest challenge is the rate. And so there are financing options today at those rates that I'm talking about, where you might be able to put 5 or 10% down on, say, a $150,000 home and finance the balance. Um, and even still, like with lot rent and $100,000 of financing or $60,000 of financing, they're still going to be under, the cost of an apartment, and they're going to own their home. Um, but the big challenge is the down payment. And so there are some programs, like we have a program that enables them to rent the home, and they actually have two leases when they do that. They have the site lease and then they have the home lease, and they kind of run concurrently and they're the same person. But if they're a good tenant, and they prove they make their payments over the course of the next 8 to 12 months, we can actually credit them their home rent payments, and a lender will take that as a down payment on the home, and they can then it's almost like a forced savings plan
It's really
to get
interesting.
them into the home, and then they become a purchaser.
Yeah, it's like a rent to own. Yeah, process. Yeah, very interesting.
I want to pivot here slowly and talk about just the kind of state of the market, the macro side of things. We had talked in a previous call about leverage in the system. Kind of maybe talk to us a little bit about what you're thinking about on the macro side of things and leverage and risks out there that maybe you see that other people don't really see right now.
Yeah, I think the concern is that like it's hard to see. It's what is it? Those of us who remember Donald Rumsfeld, it was the unknown unknowns that we need to be cautious of. It's not the unknown knowns, the known knowns. It's the unknown unknowns. And um, my sense, and a lot of this comes from having worked and been successful through the Great Recession, is when you see financial innovation increase, it's kind of a clue for me that there's something coming that could cause a fall. Um, just like my example of, when the money's raised, you got to put it out. Um, a lot of money's been raised for these I'll say private credit vehicles, with kind of like, hey, we're going to give you, a point a month in return. Um, And, frankly, a lot of investors that I talk to think that they gave that private credit fund $1, and that private credit fund turned around and loaned it out at a really high rate. And maybe they're taking a little bit and then they're sending the rest to the investor. And they don't appreciate that they actually are levering that dollar in order to increase their own return. And then what happens is when the debt burden comes to call, all the equity ends up being wiped out. And so, and there's a fair bit of this on the internet. I think to me the biggest thing that stands out is nobody really seems to know how much leverage is there. It's one thing to lever that dollar, but then what's happening is there's now a pool of those loans, and there's another layer of leverage being added on top of that, and then maybe another one on top of that. And it reminds me a little bit of kind of the CDO market where they were tranching up mortgage loans and then tranching them again and reclassifying them. Like stuff
Hmm.
that was a C became an A in the next tranche. And you're like, wait, how is that? I mean, it doesn't sound ethical to me, but I'm kind of a simpleton when it comes to that stuff. So that's a concern. Um, Maybe we can grow our way out of it. Maybe AI, it saves it. But I think we are seeing that a significant amount of the private credit market the loans have been made to software companies, and they're experiencing some disarray because of the disruption around AI. And are they going to put some of these software companies out of business and make them irrelevant? So I would say I feel like it's a moment to pause. I think it's a moment to go to hard assets. And, if I wonder like where my money is, you can drive by it. You can knock on the door. Um, doesn't mean that, there shouldn't be diversification. And maybe you take some risk. I think a lot of people just didn't know the risks they were taking in some of these private credit vehicles.
For sure. Yeah, we've seen some of this even in crypto recently. There's a lot of rehypothecating loans, if you will, basically staking, restaking. Uh, we don't need to go
Yeah,
down the rabbit
yeah.
hole, but it's kind of similar to that. It sounds like.
Well, and when it turns, right, like so many people in business today weren't around in '06, '07. They just think, oh, I'll always be able to refinance this if I need to refinance this. Um, I was at an event yesterday in Philadelphia, and Peter Linneman was speaking, who's the renowned Wharton professor, who's really known for his work on cap rates and correlation interest rates and so on. And he was reminiscing about '07, '08, and he said interest rates were zero, but you couldn't borrow because the equity wasn't there. And so, I think there's a lot of folks that just, they're not factoring in the risk that the market becomes insolvent. And it reminds me of a quote. I think it was Buffett. He said, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain liquid.
Hmm.
And I don't want that to happen, but I've always got that in the back of my mind that we need to be prepared for it.
Yeah. What do you?
Yeah.
How are you preparing for potential unknown risks right now?
I think as a company, we just our properties are um, under levered by many measures. I mean, I think across the business at any given time, we're probably running like 55% leverage. We might do a CMBS loan where we take it up to 70, but we've got other properties there at 40 at the time because they're on their cycle of a refinancing coming. So we generally just keep low leverage. We're pretty risk averse when it comes to floating rate debt. Um, it's not that we've never done a bridge loan, we have, but we make sure that we're under levered on that bridge loan, and that there's going to be no question that we're going to be able to get out of it when the time comes. I would add to that people too. Like, there's no substitute for the right people. We can do all the right financial things, but even the wrong people can screw up the right financial things. So, we have a really good team they're very focused every day on protecting our investors, ensuring that we're aligned with them, and doing right by our residents. And we think, ultimately, that's the difference maker for us.
Hmm. Anything else on like the when it comes to like your team, like operational things that you guys bring to the table that stand out?
I've made an effort to recruit people who have diverse backgrounds, including real estate. Um, I think manufactured housing experience has been important, but I didn't want it to be the only experience because I think as an industry, we are so far behind the rest of the world. I mean, and real estate in general, right, is just kind of behind because of the type of asset it is, and maybe we'll have less places AI can touch, and that's just kind of the reality. But when I look at our team, I think about like our general counsel is a master's in tax, and he's got 25 years of transaction work in real estate. Our CFO spent the bulk of his career after public accounting with a company that did SPACs, did oil and gas financing, became a REIT, and sold a $4 billion portfolio of Sunbelt apartments to Blackstone. And he's bringing, as is Levi and our operations manager, they're bringing their experience from other industries that tend to think about the world differently than the traditional mobile home park guy. And they're bringing that to bear on an industry that's pretty staid and slow moving. And we think that's an advantage from an operating perspective.
Um, One question I have for you, Nathan, relative to raising capital, right? So obviously you've raised capital for a lot of real estate projects, and opportunity, infrastructure. How is that different, the same nuance from raising capital for a fund? Because that's obviously a bit different in process.
Yeah, I think it is different, and I think we've got kind of our own take on it, which not everybody can do. But um, I like the fund model as an investor, and it's why we chose the fund. I like the diversification that it offers investors. I don't like kind of pushing investors to have to pick, winners and losers. Um, you know, and so we've chosen the fund model, and then or I've chosen to be the largest investor in that model. And I think that's where the differentiation is. And so I think what a lot of people think when they hear fund is, okay, you haven't bought anything and you want me to write you a check on a thesis. And, if I send you the money, you're like we talked about, you're going to go spend it. Um, we've chosen to really kind of seed our funds with investments that we've already made. And so, I mean, like I'm looking at our fund three, which is open for investment, and we've got 5 properties that we've purchased. And, there's a few investors in it, but it was mostly me purchasing properties to get that fund going. And then we can say to our investors, hey, here's where you are. I've made this commitment, come join me, and let's add more properties to it. It's almost like a hybrid of a blank check fund versus an individual deal. Somebody wants to see the deals, we'll send them our deal sheet. Here's what we're looking at. Here's the returns we're targeting. Here's how we get there on each individual deal. Um, but as an investor, I make no bones about it. I prefer the fund model. I'd like a little less risk, and if that means a little less reward, then I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm. Is Fund Three? Is it an evergreen fund?
It is technically evergreen, although we've identified kind of a 7 to 10 year window that we expect to operate in. I don't, I think evergreen is a popular word right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I've learned when I started buying properties, um, I'll never forget this. I called a friend who's in the business. I was my first property under contract, and I asked him, I was just kind of, hey, would you want to invest in this with me? And he said, what's your exit? And I mean, I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about it. I think this is 10 years ago. I just thought, well, I'm going to own this forever. What do you mean, what's my exit? Like, look at the cash. Like, we'll have paid back our investment in a few years. Like, why would I sell it? But it was the right question. And so, we've taken that and we approach every asset now with this idea of like, there is a price that we must sell at. So our second fund, we really intended this to be a kind of 7 to 8 year kind of cycle. I guess we're about 27 months in or something, about an $18 million raise. And we just chose to sell because frankly, we got an offer that we couldn't refuse. Um, and what we do is, we look at refinancing and the proceeds we can get for refinancing versus the sale and say, okay, if we sold it, we'd return all the money, from the investment. Um, If we refinance it, our leverage is maybe 70%. So that other money has to stay there. What's the theoretical return we're earning on that money that stays there if we could have sold it? And if it gets too low, we've got to sell and let our investors hopefully recycle our money. A lot of them are
Yeah,
just going to turn around and invest in our third fund.
it's a really good point. Yeah, I think especially like in real estate in particular, that's a great thought process. At a certain price, you have to sell.
Yeah, it's another Buffett saying is like every time you turn down an offer for an asset, you're effectively agreeing to buy that asset at the price you turn down. And I think that's more true for like public equities than it is for real estate because of the transactional costs with real estate, broker fees, transfer costs, and so on. But it's a good kind of like finger in the wind test for us as we think about these.
It is. It is. It came up. The thought actually crossed my mind a couple months ago. There's one of the properties I had. It's went up in value, pretty good amount, and one of the neighbors was selling. Uh, and I thought, I'm like, I look at it, I'm like, yeah, they're kind of asking like sky high prices. I'm like, at a certain point, there's got to be, whether it's, it's not $1 million house, but like if somebody offered me $1 million or like, $2 million, like, yeah, it's a
Honey, we're
I'm
forever
gonna take
moving.
it.
property, but I have to sell it, at a certain
Yeah,
price.
yeah.
That's a great thought, and especially when it comes to real estate, like you said, 70% leverage. It's a lot of this. If you continue to hold on to those smaller properties, you won't be able to scale, or
That's right.
maybe especially like as an individual. Uh,
Yeah, I do think the longer term thinking though gives us hopefully a window where we've got flexibility to execute the exit, either refinancing or sale. I think, as I've watched over the last 6 or 7 years of the real estate cycle, is like there was a premium for portfolios for a time, and then the premium reversed, and there was, a premium for individual deals. Cap rates, were coming down, then cap rates went up a little bit. I think um, one of the reasons we give ourselves the flexibility we do is so that we could try to time that properly. We get time to aggregate the right assets. Maybe they get some refinancings in there, but you say like, okay, what's happening in the market? Are we in the the portfolio premium era, or are we in the individual deal era? And then we can try to execute the right strategy.
cool, well, Nate. I know we're going over time here. What's next for you guys? What are you really excited about right now?
Well, I'm really excited about executing our plan on our third fund. Because of this transaction with our second fund, probably late summer, I'd expect we'd be completing our fund three raise because we're going to have, a lot of people be transitioning their investment into our third fund, and we want to perform on that, but we're always kind of scouring for new opportunities. One of the things we want to do as a firm is we want to unlock uh, opportunities in undervalued assets. And we intentionally we don't say in undervalued real estate assets. We're looking for businesses, perhaps operating companies that may be undervalued assets. I think we probably all are aware that there's a lot of baby boomer businesses that are going to change hands over the next decade or so. And frankly, you could buy them for a lot less expensively than mobile home parks. Now they're more operationally intensive, but we're looking at opportunities where, as we've done with mobile home parks, myself and my family can lead those investments, and we can begin to offer them to our team.
Awesome. Well, Nate, this has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate you joining us, sharing your insights. Where could people go to connect with you and learn more about your company?
Yeah, email me at nathan@arxventures.com. Go to our website, which is just arxventures.com, and you can click on invest or look at some of our offerings there. We are a really low pressure investment shop. I never push anybody to invest with us. Because I'm leading the investment. We're going to figure out a way to do it. But I really do have a strong belief that these kinds of offerings should be available to folks, and we want to be there to help educate them, share how we think about the world, be transparent. I mean, I really want to be outstanding in our communication and reporting, whether things are good or whether things are bad. I mean, we have a company philosophy: good news fast, bad news faster, and we want to operate the same way with our investors. So, get in touch, follow us, and get in the deal flow and make your decisions as that comes.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fun conversation, Nathan. We'll make sure to put all your contact info in the show notes as well.